The financial fortress of Wall Street. It's just been breached. But here's the thing. It wasn't by some frontal assault on the main gate. It was by compromising the critical supply routes, the ones that deliver its most sensitive secrets. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a necessary and I think a pretty critical look at systemic cyber risk in the financial sector. Our sources are all pointing toward one specific seismic event, the massive failure of the SitusAMC vendor breach back in November of 2025. And this wasn't, a sophisticated hack against a bank's main servers. Those are usually layered in concrete and firewalls. This was an attack on the infrastructure. The non-sexy routine but absolutely necessary digital plumbing for the entire mortgage industry. And the result? A leak that exposed incredibly sensitive customer data. We're talking social security numbers, bank details, from clients of every major player, JPMorgan Chase, Citibank, Morgan Stanley, you name it.
It's the ultimate lesson in systemic risk. And our mission today is really to analyze the frantic, almost reactive response from Washington. We've seen a dizzying torrent of new government mandates from agencies like the OCC and the SEC, all rushing to secure the financial system after the breach happened.
Right.
So you have to ask, is this rush of new regulation actually solving the fundamental third-party risk problem? Or are we just seeing, expensive, burdensome mandates placed on businesses after the systemic failure has already occurred?
That's the crux of it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
When the government, which is often so slow to react, suddenly springs into action, is it preventative medicine? Is it addressing the root cause?
Or is it something else?
Yeah, or is it just creating regulatory checkpoints that cost time and money without delivering real hardened security?
Mm-hmm.
It feels like we're punishing the symptoms instead of trying to cure the disease.
Precisely. The core takeaway from the sources, looking at both the failure and the reaction, is pretty stark. Operational resilience, despite being classified as a top priority for supervisors, remains dangerously fragile.
And the weakest link is?
It's always the reliance on external third-party service providers. The cost of outsourcing, of that convenience, is giving up direct control over massive amounts of sensitive consumer data.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's dig into the real-world example that just shattered the market's complacency. That SitusAMC incident.
Mm-hmm.
This single event, November 2025, it perfectly illustrates this cascade effect you're talking about.
Right. It wasn't just a hit to one company. It spread
throughout the entire ecosystem.
And it's important to understand who SitusAMC is. They aren't a company you or I would interact with directly, but they are deeply institutionally embedded. They serve hundreds of financial institutions, handling everything related to residential real estate loans and mortgages.
So all the paperwork.
Think of all the due diligence paperwork for a loan, all that sensitive, highly personal documentation. That's what they handle.
So when the breach happened, what did the attackers actually get? Because this wasn't just, email addresses and passwords.
No, not at all. This was the crown jewels of personal finance. The data exposed was highly sensitive consumer information. We're talking full social security numbers, bank account details, detailed loan applications, and personal income and tax filings.
Data that is absolute gold for identity thieves.
Exactly.
The scale of this is what makes it systemic. The sources noted that this incident immediately raised fears of widespread identity theft and loan fraud. This wasn't a surgical strike. This showed that even the largest, most secure U.S. banks were compromised indirectly.
Yes, indirectly. They outsourced a core function, and that vendor's shortfall just bypassed their own massive, expensive security apparatus.
There was a metaphor for this, wasn't there?
Yeah, a powerful market metaphor that was used really drives this home. SitusAMC is described as the necessary plumbing for the commercial and residential real estate market.
Actual plumbing.
Exactly. So when you have a massive financial system that relies on shared infrastructure like a utility, an attack on that one single point compromises the supply chain for pretty much the entire industry overnight.
Which raises a really fundamental question about the modern financial system. Why is the market structured so that almost everyone relies on the same critical, but often less resourced, service providers? It feels like a systemic design flaw.
Well, it is a function of efficiency and specialization, but it creates the structural vulnerability. If we connect this back to the bigger picture, you realize securing the financial system isn't about hardening 10,000 different banks.
It's about securing, 10 critical vendors?
It's about securing a handful of highly concentrated third-party vendors. That's where the risk is.
That concentration makes them the ultimate weak link. And the sources have hard data on this. Vendors and supply chains are cited as this massive vulnerability, contributing to 38% of invoice fraud cases and, 43% of phishing attacks among mid-market firms.
Yeah.
So these third parties are just punching holes in the bank's perimeter before the attackers even look for a software bug.
I like the analogy of the medieval fortress. The bank itself, that's the fortified castle. It has these strong, expensive internal walls built through massive security investments. Okay.
But that castle relies entirely on external supply services, the water well, the delivery routes, and those are maintained by these third-party vendors. So if the government is just supervising the castle walls but ignoring the exposed external supply chain.
You're vulnerable.
Yeah.
If the water well is compromised, the whole castle suffers. Reliance on these third parties just dramatically reduces a bank's direct operational control.
That's it. It shifts the risk outside those fortified walls and makes the bank vulnerable to a breach they can't immediately stop or even detect. And that loss of control is exactly why we see this rapid, sweeping regulatory response.
The government trying to mandate security from the outside in.
Often at great cost to the private sector.
Okay, let's transition to that response, because this is where the conversation about regulatory burden versus, real operational resilience gets really heated. The reaction has been enormous.
And fast.
Take the SEC, the main regulator for securities firms. They have their Regulation ST amendments, with a compliance deadline for big companies set for December 3rd, 2025. Just weeks after the breach became public.
Right. And what does SP demand?
It mandates written policies, robust due diligence on vendors, and crucially, it puts a strict 72-hour deadline on those service providers.
72 hours.
That vendor, the SitusAMC equivalent, has to notify the institution of a security breach within 3 days. It's an attempt to force quick transparency upstream.
And meanwhile, you have the banking regulators, the OCC, FDIC, the Fed. They have their own separate rule.
The Computer Security Incident Notification Rule, yeah. This requires bank service providers to notify their customer banks as soon as possible if an incident materially degrades their services for 4 or more hours.
So on paper, it looks like this tight layered net is being cast.
It does. But this is where we have to ask the critical question. If third-party risk management was supposedly a top priority for supervisors, why did SitusAMC happen at all?
Good point.
The OCC, that's the Office of the Controller of the Currency, they have a department called CIRRUS. Their entire job is to conduct direct supervision and coordinated joint examinations of these significant service providers.
Wait. So you're saying the government was already tasked with actively overseeing the digital health of these critical vendors long before the breach?
Yes, and yet the failure still occurred. It really forces a conservative critique of this whole regulatory model.
How so?
Well, the failure demonstrates that mandates and constant government auditing can only check boxes. They can't replace fundamental vigilance and, frankly, internal security investment by the private sector itself. The government is forced to implement a one-size-fits-all framework, but they're constantly playing catch-up.
Proving that oversight alone does not equal security.
Right.
And here's where the lag between corporate awareness and actually protecting the consumer becomes a huge issue. We have that tight 72-hour rule for the vendor to tell the bank.
Seems quick.
But then the banks, they get up to 30 days to notify the affected individuals whose sensitive information was compromised. And that's under the same SEC rule.
And that 30-day window, that highlights a critical failure in genuine consumer accountability. The institution knows within days that your highly sensitive data is out there, your social security number, your tax documents.
But the consumer?
The consumer, who's facing the very real threat of identity theft, might not find out for almost a full month. This is the unacceptable lag between corporate compliance and protecting the individual.
30 days is an eternity in the world of fraud. A criminal can open credit cards, take out loans, and just disappear long before you get a letter saying you might want to freeze your credit.
And this compliance challenge is only getting harder because the threat landscape is evolving faster than any regulator can possibly write a new rule.
Absolutely. The threat actors are accelerating their methods. They're leveraging new technology to make compliance harder and more expensive by the minute.
A major challenge now is the rise of generative AI in cyber fraud. Threat actors are using GenAI tools to increase the sheer volume and, frankly, the frightening sophistication of their attacks.
Like deepfakes.
Deepfakes, voice cloning, targeting specific C-suite executives. Imagine a bank executive getting a call from what sounds exactly like their CEO, requesting an immediate emergency wire transfer.
That just bypasses all the traditional security training. The psychological element is overwhelming, and then you have the payment speed problem compounding that.
That's right. The surging use of real-time payments and crypto by threat actors means once the money is gone, recovery for the financial institution is, and I quote, virtually impossible.
Speed is the enemy of fraud detection.
It is. And it incentivizes faster attacks, and we can't ignore the old school problems either. Ransomware is still a dominant threat.
But it's gotten cheaper, right?
More cost-effective, yeah. The frequency and severity keep going up, with developers adopting this ransomware as a service model, the RAS model.
So you don't even have to be a coding genius anymore.
No, you can just rent the tools and target sophisticated firms. It significantly increases the volume of attacks on that whole financial supply chain.
And finally, internally, banks are fighting their own history. The prolonged use of older or legacy systems introduces massive security vulnerabilities. The sources note that delaying system updates to save money in the short term, it dramatically reduces operational resilience.
It's the legacy trap. The cost of upgrading is astronomical, but the cost of not upgrading could be existential.
So to sort of summarize the central tension here, you have regulators like the OCC and the FFIEC issuing updated, robust guidance. They've defined the rules of the road.
They have. The government has implemented these consistent assessment frameworks.
But the SitusAMC failure shows that this top-down regulatory approach, it just can't replace fundamental vigilance and sustained heavy investment by the private sector. The government can set the floor, but if the private industry doesn't build the roof strong enough, the breach is inevitable.
And the industry itself knows this. Their own internal reports confirm that these new resilience regulations will require more proactive monitoring of supplier security postures.
So the risk isn't theoretical.
Not at all. It's actively compromising sensitive personal information right now, and that's turning government mandates into cleanup operations rather than effective preventative security.
We've gone deep into this today. We've seen government agencies frantically trying to legislate security, but the private sector's reliance on these critical, shared third parties, it remains the financial system's Achilles heel, forcing this massive, costly regulatory overhead.
And for you, the learner, this deep dive really demonstrates a crucial point about modern finance and your own privacy. Your most valuable personal data is only as secure as the weakest, most cost-efficient vendor trusted by the largest financial institutions. So if market discipline, the fear of losing massive clients, isn't enough to force robust security, and if new, costly government regulations are simply playing catch-up to the last breach, what concrete incentive must exist to protect your sensitive data before the next systemic failure hits? That is the real question of corporate accountability.